We're now less than 24 hours away from version 3 of Zenless and the new wind element, which makes it the perfect time to look back at the past year of the game, and more specifically, the Rupture class. Rupture was hyped up as a new agent class that scaled off HP, which also came with its own unique damage type called Sheer Force, that allowed you to completely ignore enemy defense. And yet now, at the end of version 2, Rupture has basically boiled down to 5 DPSs with only one premium support and a class identity that feels incomplete, with a community sentiment that thinks it shouldn't have been made into a separate class in the first place. 2.0 was a big patch for Zenless, as it coincided with the game's first anniversary. We got a ton of pulls, a whole new area, and new mechanics like the pawn shop, the temple, and holo exploration. On top of that, we also got our first playable Rupture agent, Yi Xuan. Along with being the first of her archetype, she was the first ever agent to have 2 ultimates, which gave her a gameplay style we hadn't seen before. And when it came to introducing us to the new damage type and building up hype for what was to come in later patches, she managed to pull it off pretty well, at least for a while. The problem is everything that came after, because the whole pitch for Rupture and the reason it supposedly needed to exist as its own class was the fact that they're capable of ignoring defense, alongside the introduction of the miasma mechanic. Since miasma boosts the enemy's defense and reduces their days and damage taken, this was supposed to make Rupture agents more effective, since they were designed to deal with the mechanic a lot easier compared to other characters. But in actuality, miasma ended up being something that pretty much every agent could deal with relatively easily. And another flaw with Rupture's design was the fact that we already had defense ignore in the game prior to its release. We've actually had it since day one, with characters like Nicole giving the team 40% def shred, and Rena sharing a part of her pen ratio with the whole team. On top of this, every patch since launch, the devs have been frequently adding def shred into new characters' base kits, mindscapes, W engines, and even the endgame buffs. So the question kind of writes itself. What is Rupture doing that other classes can't do or won't be able to do in the future? Compounding this is a lack of build options, because while attackers and anomaly units have gotten multiple disc sets that they can swap between depending on the matchup, we only got one singular Rupture set for the entirety of version 2, meaning that Rupture agents have been stuck running the same build setup for an entire year, which makes it get pretty boring when every single character in the class has to be built almost the exact same way. Another issue comes from our current roster, because throughout version 2, we ended up getting a total of 5 Rupture DPSs, which isn't too bad since they also had to add non-Rupture characters too in order to keep the game fresh. But because of how their kits are designed, generic attack boosting supports don't work well with them, and Rupture having built-in defense ignore means that external def shred and pen stats from discs are completely wasted, which ends up locking you out of using some of the game's best supports. The same issue also comes up with stunners, as you can't even use someone like Lighter with Hidari, Banyue, or Monato because his additional ability doesn't work with Rupture characters. Things like this cut Rupture out of the usual team building variety and leave players with few alternative teammate options. Something else to point out is that despite getting 5 DPSs, we only got 1 premium support. Lucia came out in patch 2.3, and that was it. That's your only premium Rupture support for the rest of the season. Panyan who exists, sure, but I think most people would agree that he's not exactly a fun character to use, and his buffs compared to Lucia are also just noticeably weaker. So if you did end up pulling for more than 1 Rupture DPS, whether it's because you were a new player trying to build your first teams, or you just really like the characters, then you're forced into this awkward setup where you're either running only 1 Rupture team with Lucia and Dial-In, or you're having to spread them out to 2 teams and using budget options that offer noticeably worse performance. And while there are a couple outliers like Yi Xuan, who's able to use Nicole for the extra ether damage bonus, or Yidhari being able to use Lycon as a replacement for Dial-In, that's not necessarily going to be viable for everyone, because it's assuming that you're someone who not only has those agents built and knows how to use them, but also aren't already using them in another team. Another issue comes with the endgame bosses and the lack of dedicated matchups. Rupture agents, by design, have lower damage multipliers than attackers do. That's the trade-off for the fact that they're able to ignore defense. The issue is that this only works if there are actually high defense bosses for Rupture to fight in the first place. Patch 2.3 gave us the Wandering Hunter, and he's the one boss in all of version 2 that I would actually call a Rupture shield boss. He's got noticeably higher defense than any other boss in the game, and his mechanic shows that he was clearly designed with Rupture in mind. But we didn't see these kind of boss designs afterwards. In fact, we kept getting the opposite. Patch 2.5 gave us the Primordial Nightmare, 2.6 gave us Vesper, and 2.7 gave us the Sanguine Sweeper, and all three of these bosses have half defense. And the introduction of Ye Xiongguang is probably one of the main reasons Rupture ended up taking a backseat. They needed to make her feel as strong as possible, given that she was the game's next official Void Hunter, which they definitely managed to do, for better or worse. She could clear every single boss in the game, regardless of its defense or resistance, thanks to a combination of extreme shield buffs, high damage multipliers, and strong mindscapes, with her M1 and M2 giving a total of 60% Death Shred, and pairing her with Nicole allowed you to hit up to 100% Death Shred in combat. But the problem isn't just the defense ignore, it's also her playstyle. Xiongguang's entire gameplay loop revolves around her Ether Veil state and burning through her resources as fast as possible, which means the faster you can chew through the enemy's HP, the better she performs. Whereas Rupture performs a lot worse against high HP, low defense targets. And the moment a boss has a massive health pool, but low base defense, the defense ignore gimmick becomes pretty useless. Now to be fair, Rupture agents aren't completely useless against these matchups, as they still have the raw damage to clear them just fine, which sounds great until you think about it and realize that it means the actual class identity isn't doing anything special, and the fact that we ended up with about 3 times as many half defense bosses as actual high defense ones, with a good chunk of them also favoring anomaly attackers in the same version that introduced an entirely new archetype built around ignoring defense, makes the situation even more confusing. All of this just ends up making Rupture not feel as unique as we might have originally expected it to be, which is a shame, given that all of these characters have something going for them that makes them feel different and allows them to stand out from one another, but when you look at the class as a whole, it's just kind of underwhelming. I do hope that Wind doesn't end up going the same direction that Rupture did, by introducing a new element alongside a couple bosses that they can do well against, only to then get hit by a bunch of counteractive mechanics that ends up making it feel like yet another unnecessary addition to the game. New archetypes should feel exciting, and they should be implemented in a way that doesn't make them feel clunky, and Wind has a real opportunity to slot into the foundation that the game has already spent 2 whole versions building. And if Rupture isn't going to be left completely in the dust during the 3.0 era, the developers have to address the things that are holding the class back. Whether that's introducing a new generic support or a hybrid agent for Rupture that would allow them to be less restrictive and explore better team variety. The devs don't need to completely stop making low defense or half defense bosses either, but they do need to give Rupture a consistent playground. Endgame modes should be more varied and not overly focused on a singular archetype, and the idea of constantly shilling kills the enthusiasm players experience in trying to do more with the characters they pulled, where they get punished for not always getting the latest agents. It also gives a sense of false confidence, making players think their characters are doing well, only for their performance to fall off noticeably after the shield goes away. It makes people question the strength of their agents, and can leave them less excited about pulling for the characters they actually like. Despite everything I brought up in this video, I do still think Rupture has potential to make a comeback. And who knows, maybe we do end up getting more characters that help make the class feel more complete in the future. All I'm trying to say is that Rupture deserved better integration than it actually got, and I hope they find a way to do things better with this new element, as well as choosing to properly polish up Rupture instead of leaving it behind.